Hey, if you've ever been stuck wondering what to paint when you don't know what to paint, it's one of the age-old questions in the world of art, and I'm here to help you out in today's video. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Shivani and I'm an artist based in the sunny city of Chennai in the south of India. I spoke about this in the previous video as well, but when I say sunny city, I mean sunny city. It's gotten really hot and I think like sweating while I'm shooting is something I'm just gonna have to get used to. It's just March right now, so it's like crazy to even think about how April and May are going to be because that's our peak summer here. But yeah, I can't keep the fan on while I'm shooting because it creates a lot of like buzzing while I'm recording and things like that. So I guess I just have to live with this for a while. Anyway, I think we've all been stuck with this question when we just don't know what to paint sometimes and we feel a little creatively blocked and things like that. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing a few ideas with you to hopefully get your creative juices flowing and get you unstuck. While we're on that topic, I also have a really cool free resource where I take you through 8 different things that you can paint in full detail, as well as 17 different bonus prompts. So there are in total 25 different ideas in that resource and it is very cool. You should definitely check it out. I'm leaving the link in the description. You can just click on it and download the free resource. So without further ado, let's start painting. For today's paintings, I've got Canson Montreal paper in front of me. I've also got my Winsor & Newton's Designer's Gouache and a ceramic palette, a jar of water. And for my brushes, I'm using Princeton Round in size 4 and 6, and I also have a Filbert brush in size 8, which I'm actually trying out for the first time today, so it's going to be interesting to see. For the paints, I've got 5 colors. I decided to work with a limited palette today, and I'm using colors which I haven't used too much. This gives me a chance to play with my colors also. The colors I've got are Naples Yellow Deep, Cypress Green, Burnt Sienna, and Brilliant Red Violet. And I also have a tube of permanent white. All of these are colors which don't come in the standard Winsor & Newton sets. I picked up the tubes individually. So I'll first start by laying out all the colors on my palette and then we can start painting. With some of the colors, you might notice that you get a lot of binder coming out from the tube, especially if it's a fairly new tube. So it's best to get rid of some of that binder onto a separate plate or palette. You don't want it in your painting because it can become a little sticky. I actually haven't thought out in detail what I'm going to be painting today, so I'm just going to be having fun and playing with my colors and seeing what comes out of it. I'm starting with some of the cypress green and adding white to it. You'll also notice that the colors that I have laid out on my palette are variations of the 3 primary colors. It's good to do that when you're working with a limited set of colors because it gives you a lot that you can play around with. If you have each of your primary tones, that is red, yellow and blue, represented in some way, the shades that you can create out of them are quite unlimited. I've got cypress green, which is more of a blue tone, and then Naples Yellow Deep is the yellow. Brilliant Red Violet is my reddish tone, but it is kind of more on the side of violet. So I also have Burnt Sienna, which also has a red undertone. I've mixed the cypress green with white and I'm adding in a bit of Naples Yellow just to give it a tinge of green. And adding in multiple colors from what you've laid out also helps there be harmony between all the colors that you mix up. It also helps you create much more complex shades rather than just using the color straight from the tube or even mixing it just with white. I've added in some more white to it because I want it to be pretty light, and then I'm just going to go in and start painting it as a background color. As I paint this, I'm not trying to achieve 100% coverage on my paper. I'm okay with there being some dry brush strokes and the white of the paper showing through in parts. That adds some texture and it adds some character to the painting. So I personally enjoy that, especially along the edges. I like there to be dry brush strokes because it just makes the painting a lot more interesting. And as you can see, I've almost used up all the color that I mixed up here, which goes to show that with gouache, you need to mix up a significant amount of paint, especially if you're applying it as a background. I'm just going to wait for that to dry, and meanwhile, let's get started on the second one. So for the second painting, I'm thinking I'll do some kind of a plant, possibly with berries or buds on it. But first I'll mix up the color for the stem. For that I've taken some of the burnt sienna along with Naples yellow deep and a bit of cypress green. As you can see, it's a kind of olive tone. I'm adding in a bit more burnt sienna. And I'm just adjusting the shade as I go, adding in different colors so that I can bring it closer to the kind of color I'm visualizing, which is a deep brownish green. Now I'm quite happy with that, so I'll start painting. And I'll start with the center stem and add a few branches from that. I'm also completely okay with my brush shaking a bit, the lines being a bit jagged and not perfectly straight, because that just adds to the natural look, especially when you're painting something like a plant. Now I'll add a few tiny stems near the ends of each one, because that's where I'll be adding in my buds or berries, whatever you want to call them. So to create the flowery elements, I'm mixing some brilliant red violet with cypress green. I'm trying to get a deep, slightly purplish blue, kind of like blueberries of sorts. So I'm just using 2 short strokes to create a roundish shape. You can make this look either like berries by making them completely circular, or you can leave them slightly like having brush strokes at the end, so it looks kind of like flower buds. We're not trying to be scientifically correct here about how the plant should look. We're just trying to create a plant-like element by adding these kind of floral features to it. The next thing I'm going to do here is add some leaves, for which I'm taking some cypress green again along with Naples yellow, and I'm mixing it together with the initial color we had mixed up for the stem. I'm adding in a bit of burnt sienna to deepen it, and I think that looks good. To paint the leaves, I start with the tip of the brush and then I press the brush down to create a leafy shape. You can use 1 stroke or 2 strokes. I tend to use 2 strokes to do this. And to do all of this, I'm using the Princeton size 6 round brush. You can add as many leaves as you want. You can have them overlapping if you want. I'm choosing not to overlap any right now. And just try to fill the branch without making it too cluttered, but also without there being too much of gaps that it looks awkward. I usually just go with the flow when I'm doing these things. I'm not going after any perfect result. I just look at the painting as I go and keep adding elements that I think would be perfect for it. You can add smaller leaves if you need to. And that's almost complete. We'll come back to it in a bit. For now, let's start painting on the blue background that we had created. I'm first just using permanent white. I'm trying to create a kind of daisy on this, so I'm using the permanent white as is and creating petals. You might find like it happened on mine, sometimes it's a little thinner than you want it to be, and maybe it's mixing with the background a bit, but that's not something you need to worry about. You can always add a second coat so that it becomes a lot more opaque. For this one, I'm taking some permanent white and mixing it with the green that we already have on the palette. I'm trying to create a much lighter shade for the leaves here to give it a kind of vintage look. I'll then create the stem and a few branches, and then I'll start adding the leaves. I'm following the same kind of strokes that I did last time, except this time I'm keeping multiple shades on my brush, so I'm dipping into the light as well as dark so that it creates variations and blends as I paint. I'll add one more branch the same way. Now I'll use some of the darker green to create some shading. You'll find that shading makes your art just pop from the paper, so adding highlights and adding some shadows are always a great addition to these kind of paintings. I ended up putting too much of the dark shade on one of the leaves, but not to worry, with gouache you can always go back in and blend it and correct it. Now I'm just stepping back into the second painting. The first one isn't done yet though, and I'm adding some shading on the leaves of the second painting. And you can immediately see how it brings the painting alive. You can also use a damp brush or take a bit of the base color and blend that out. Jumping back into the first painting again, I'm actually not too happy with the petals, so I'm mixing up a very light lilac shade using the color we mixed up for the buds in the second painting and mixing it with white. And I'll just go over the petals with that. And then I'll use a slightly darker shade of violet to add shading on the petals. Now I'm using burnt sienna and mixing it with the deep violet. And I'm using a sort of stippling technique to add the center of the flower. The final thing I'll do is use a slightly lighter shade of the violet again to shade the buds. And there we have it, our first two paintings are complete and we'll soon be diving into the next two. Hey guys, just popping back in here to remind you that there's the link in the description that I mentioned where I take you through 25 different prompt ideas for when you're stuck and you don't know what to paint. And even though I used gouache as the medium when I did these paintings, you can really use any medium. So as long as you're an artist and who wants to paint or draw something, this resource is going to be very helpful for you. So click the link in the description. Now let's get back to painting. For the next painting, we're going to be trying out some fun lemons. My mom-in-law just recently sent me some amazing lemons, and so that was top of mind, I think. So I decided to just go in and paint some lemons, and for this I'm using Naples Yellow Deep and mixing it with some permanent white. Although I would usually use a brighter yellow for lemons, like primary yellow. But since we decided to work with a limited palette, we're going to use what we have. So I'll just use the paint and create this kind of lemon shape with those two projections on the side. I don't know what they're called. And I'm going to be adding 2 lemons, and I'm just adding some white to give it a highlight. Like we've seen in the previous paintings, it helps so much when you just add a bit of highlight and a bit of shadow. It just brings your paintings to life, and you'll see that happen with this as well. So the next thing I'll do is add a bit of burnt sienna to give it some shadow, blending that in. And I'm also creating those little dots that you see on lemons. Now I'm taking some of the brilliant red violet and mixing it with the violet tone that we already have on the palette. And I'm just creating some tiny flowers on the painting. These are going to be small 5-petaled flowers. You don't need to overthink this, just do whatever you feel like. I'm just giving them random placements. The next thing I'll do is use the olive green which we already have on our palette and create a few stems and leaves. For this one, I'm creating more long, slender leaves to make it slightly different from the ones we did before. And again, I'm just looking for gaps and filling in leaves in places where I think it would help the composition look a little bit more balanced. I don't want it to look too cluttered. I want there to be white space, but at the same time, I don't want it to look too empty either. And once that's done, I'll use the same yellow we used for the lemon and add some centers on the flowers. And I'm using permanent white to create some highlights on the petals and then just blending them in. The final thing I'll do is just use a bit of burnt sienna and make those little dots on the lemons more obvious. And I love how this one's turned out. Now for the final painting, I am trying out my filbert brush for the first time, and I was completely winging this. I just did whatever came to my mind at that time. I literally looked at the brush and I was like, what could I paint with this? And I painted the first thing I thought of, which was a seashell, which I think it was beautifully suited for this kind of a brush. And in case you don't know what a filbert brush is, it is pretty much a flat brush, but the bristles are rounded into an oval shape at the tip rather than being straight. So it's very suited for multiple kinds of applications, and for florals they actually give you a beautiful look to your paintings. So I'm just using the brush to create these little segments of the seashell. The kind of shell I'm trying to create is the kind of fanned out one. Again, not sure what that's called. Let me see if I can find out and add that into the video as text on the screen. But I just thought it would be a great way to try this brush out. So as you can see, I'm getting these beautiful round edges at the top. Just because of the shape of the brush, I'm not really having to do anything. And when I turn the brush to its side, I get lovely straight lines, which I'll use for the shading as well. And I forgot to mention the colors I used. I mixed a bit of burnt sienna and Naples yellow deep with permanent white to paint this. The next thing I'll do is add some highlights using permanent white, and since the paint is still mildly wet on the paper, they're blending together well. And I'm also using the dry brushing technique here to create texture, and I think it's very well suited for this kind of a painting. And I'm adding a few variations in the color like you see in naturally occurring seashells by just adding in different tones like burnt sienna and then making some strokes at the bottom. And then I'm using the side of the brush to create lines between each segment, which gives it really nice shading and detailing. The last thing I'm going to do here is just add some of this blue. Since I had it left on my palette, I decided to use it and make it look kind of like the sea at the bottom of the seashell. And I'm just swatching the color once to make sure it's dry enough on my brush before I go into the painting. And then I'm lightly brushing the paint onto the paper so that I get the texture that I'm going after. And it's beautifully contrasting the seashell, so I think that was a great addition to this one. So that's it. Those are our 4 paintings, and we used just 4 colors and white, of course, to create all of these different shades. And you can see what a beautiful variation of shades we were able to create, and at the same time we were able to create harmony across all the different colors that we used in these paintings. They kind of look like a collection. And I think I went into this completely blind. I didn't really have any idea of what I wanted to paint. In fact, I was putting off this shoot because I just wasn't feeling inspired enough, and I was just delaying the shoot. But then I decided to just sit in front of it and give myself a challenge of just using few colors and see what comes out of it. And I'm so happy with the results. And I think that just goes to show that practice is the best way forward, even on the days that you're feeling blocked. I just think the more you practice, the more familiar you get with your colors and with your tools, the easier it becomes for you to just face that blank paper and paint something. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope you were painting along, or if you weren't, then please do try them out whenever you're free and share them with me. Tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see what you create. For those of you who are interested in gouache as a medium, I have an amazing Skillshare class, which is a Gouache 101 that takes you through all the basics you need to know to get started with the medium, right from the materials, tools, techniques, up to color mixing, color theory. And then we work on a project together where we create a boho style abstract painting. Everybody who's taken this class has left great reviews. They're really enjoying it. So I really hope you'll check it out. I'm sure you'll find lots of value in there. A few weeks ago, I had a video where I taught you how to paint 5 different botanicals, and I taught you how to mix realistic shades of green. I'm going to be taking that one step further in my next video, which is going to be coming out in a week's time, where I'll be showing you 5 more botanicals and flowers that you can paint with gouache. It's going to be very beginner friendly and very interesting. So make sure you subscribe to my channel below so that you don't miss that. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.